The sub-zero winds of New Providence howled through fractured environmental seals, carrying the acrid smell of burning polymer and ionized metal. Sarah Rice stood in the central communication hub, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces with the precision of a concert pianist. Around her, the colony's emergency response system transformed from a peaceful infrastructure management network into a distributed combat intelligence grid. When the first long-range sensors detected the incoming Zorn fleet, most would have expected terror. Instead, New Providence hummed with a different energy, a calculated, almost predatory anticipation. The colony wasn't just a settlement. It was a multi-generational experiment in survival, crafted by humanity's most audacious pioneers. Sarah's grandmother had been among the first colonists, a quantum systems engineer who helped design the planet's adaptive infrastructure. Her grandfather was a veteran of the Martian Reconstruction Wars, who understood that survival meant more than defensive positions. It meant turning every limitation into an opportunity. The colony's initial response was anything but conventional. As Zorn dropships breached the outer atmosphere, quantum-encrypted communication lines began weaving an intricate web of misdirection. False thermal signatures bloomed across the planetary surface, creating a holographic battlefield that would confuse even the most advanced targeting systems. In the underground fabrication centers, automated systems began repurposing mining equipment, agricultural drones, and terraforming machinery. Massive bore cutters originally designed to shape planetary landscapes now calibrated themselves into devastating close combat weapons. Atmospheric processors became electromagnetic pulse generators. Hydroponic nutrient injectors transformed into precision chemical weapon delivery systems. Sarah watched her great-aunt Alina, the colony's chief biosystems architect, interface directly with the planetary defense network. Alina's cybernetic implants, a testament to humanity's ability to merge biological potential with technological innovation, allowed her to perceive the incoming invasion not as a threat, but as a complex systems problem to be solved. "Initiate Chimera Protocol," Alina murmured, her neural link cascading through the colony's distributed intelligence. Layers of camouflage and adaptive camouflage systems began to activate, turning New Providence from a seemingly vulnerable colony into a living, breathing defensive organism. The first wave of Zorn biomechanical warforms crashed through the protective atmospheric barrier, their razor-sharp appendages extended for maximum devastation. But they didn't find a panicked human settlement. Instead, they encountered a meticulously prepared battlefield where every centimeter of terrain had been transformed into a potential weapon. Sarah's plasma cutter, a family heirloom passed through generations of planetary engineers, wasn't just a tool. It represented generations of human adaptability. Originally designed to slice through kilometers of planetary bedrock during initial colonization efforts, it could now be recalibrated as a devastating close combat weapon. Outside, the first Zorn landing parties discovered that New Providence's seemingly vulnerable dome was anything but passive. Adaptive metamaterials shifted and responded, creating complex geometric patterns that refracted energy weapons, absorbed kinetic impacts, and channeled destructive forces away from critical infrastructure. What the Zorn saw as a simple colonial outpost was, in reality, a multi-generational strategic masterpiece. Every structure, every system, every piece of infrastructure had been designed with conflict in mind. Not out of paranoia, but out of a deep understanding that survival at the galactic frontier required more than defensive positions. It required reimagining the very concept of defense. As the first explosive decompression warnings began to sound, Sarah Rice allowed herself the briefest moment of a predatory smile. The Zorn had come expecting a quick conquest. Instead, they had just stepped into a carefully prepared trap that would redefine their understanding of human potential. The real battle was just beginning. Captain Marcus Chen gripped the quantum-entangled command interface, feeling the planet's nervous system pulse through his neural link. The initial Zorn assault had been brutal, but brutality wasn't strategy, and Chen was about to teach them the difference. Beneath the scared planetary surface, A network of tunnels originally carved for mineral exploration now hummed with a different purpose. These weren't simple escape routes or defensive positions. They were a living, breathing tactical ecosystem engineered over decades by humans who understood that survival meant constant reinvention. Lieutenant Aisha Nakamura monitored the subterranean networks, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed layers of geological data, thermal signatures, and quantum-encrypted communication streams. The tunnels were more than infrastructure. They were a weapon waiting to be unleashed. The Zorn's invasion doctrine relied on overwhelming force and predictable defensive responses. They had spent millennia conquering civilizations that broke predictably under pressure. New Providence would be different. Every system, every piece of terrain was a potential kill zone. Every colonist a variable they couldn't calculate. Chen's squadron wasn't just fighting a defensive battle. They were conducting a live-action systems test that would rewrite the fundamental understanding of planetary defense. The first wave of Zorn warforms discovered this the hard way. Geothermal vents, originally designed to stabilize the colony's environmental systems, now became superheated killing corridors. Automated mining lasers, calibrated for precise rock excavation, now tracked biomechanical targets with terrifying accuracy. Terraforming drones transformed into kamikaze weapons, their delicate environmental sensors repurposed as target acquisition systems. In the command center, Shen watched a holographic representation of the battlefield. It wasn't a traditional military display, but a complex ecosystem of intersecting variables. Each Zorn warform wasn't just a target, but a potential source of tactical information, technological insight, and strategic advantage. Initiate Hydra Protocol, Chen commanded, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. Lieutenant Nakamura's eyes widened. The Hydra Protocol was more than a defensive strategy. It was a systemic approach to combat that treated the entire planetary surface as a single adaptive organism. Captured Zorn warforms began to emit carefully crafted quantum signatures, creating a false network of communication that would slowly poison the invaders' tactical understanding. What seemed like standard electronic warfare was actually a carefully constructed psychological operation designed to create maximum uncertainty. Underground, robotic mining systems that had spent years carving through New Providence's rocky terrain now became a mobile network of defensive and offensive capabilities. Massive bore cutters could emerge from the ground at unexpected angles, creating three-dimensional kill zones that defied traditional military doctrine. The Zorn discovered that every attempt to establish a foothold was met with a response that seemed to anticipate their movements. Dropships found landing zones transforming into pools of liquefied rock. Defensive positions mysteriously shifted, creating kill corridors that seemed to move with an almost sentient intelligence. Chen understood something the Zorn did not. True defense wasn't about creating impenetrable barriers. It was about creating a system so adaptive, so unpredictable, that the very concept of invasion became meaningless. In the command center, a young communications specialist named Diego Ramirez made a breakthrough that would change the entire nature of the conflict. By analyzing the quantum communication signatures of the captured Zorn warforms, he discovered a fundamental weakness in their distributed intelligence network. The Zorn's strength, their perfectly coordinated biomechanical systems, was also their greatest vulnerability. Their collective intelligence relied on instantaneous communication and perfect synchronization. Introduce enough chaos, enough unexpected variables, and that system would begin to break down. As the first hours of the invasion concluded, the Zorn found themselves fighting not just a military force, but an entire planetary ecosystem that seemed to be actively resisting their invasion. Every system, every piece of infrastructure was a potential weapon. Every colonist was a variable they couldn't predict. The real battle was just beginning, and New Providence was ready. The research bunker resembled a controlled chaos of human ingenuity, a labyrinth of holographic displays, quantum-entangled computing cores, and alien technology in various states of deconstruction. Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved between workstations with a predatory grace, her cybernetic implants casting soft blue shadows across equipment salvaged from the ongoing conflict. Her team was unlike any research group in human history. Dr. Kwame Okoro, a biomechanical engineer who had survived the Lagos technological insurgency, worked alongside Yuki Tanaka, a quantum systems theorist whose neural architecture allowed her to perceive computational problems in four-dimensional space. Beside them, Viktor Volkov manipulated captured Zorn technology with hands that were part organic, part sophisticated nanomechanical interfaces. The Prometheus Protocol was more than a research project. It was humanity's existential response to an alien threat that had conquered countless civilizations. "We're not just reverse engineering," Elena muttered, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that dissected a Zorn communications module. "We're performing radical epistemological surgery on their entire technological paradigm." Each piece of captured Zorn technology told a story, a narrative of biological engineering so advanced it blurred the lines between machine and organism. Their communication networks weren't just electronic. They were living, breathing systems that processed information through bioquantum computational matrices. Yuki Tanaka identified the first breakthrough. The Zorn's technological supremacy relied on a fundamental assumption that information processing should mirror biological neural networks. But human thinking was different, more chaotic, more unpredictable, more creative. Their systems expect linear progression, Yuki explained, projecting a complex holographic model that showed the intricate communication pathways of a Zorn warform. "We're going to introduce controlled chaos." The team began developing what they called conceptual viruses, computational constructs that didn't just break Zorn technology, but fundamentally reimagined how information could be processed and transmitted. Dr. Okoro focused on the biomechanical interfaces. The Zorn warforms weren't just machines. They were living organisms engineered for perfect synchronization. But perfection, the team realized, was a form of brittleness. Every perfectly synchronized system had inherent vulnerabilities. "Think of it like genetic diversity," Okoro explained, showing how they were introducing computational mutations that would propagate through the Zorn's technological ecosystem. A monoculture looks strong until the right virus arrives. Viktor Volkov worked on physical transformation technologies, using quantum-entangled manufacturing techniques developed during humanity's solar system expansion. He began creating hybrid systems that could literally reshape themselves in real time. A captured Zorn communication device could be transformed from a communication relay to a sophisticated jamming system in milliseconds. The bunker became a crucible of human potential. They weren't just adapting alien technology. They were performing a kind of technological judo, using the Zorn's own technological momentum against them. Elena Rodriguez understood something profound. Technological superiority wasn't about having the most advanced systems. It was about the ability to conceptualize, to reimagine, to transform. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly. A junior researcher named Maria Gonzalez noticed a quantum resonance pattern in the Zorn communication modules that suggested a fundamental limitation in their distributed intelligence network. By introducing carefully crafted computational anomalies, they could create cascading system failures that would propagate through the entire Zorn technological ecosystem. The Prometheus Protocol was becoming more than a research project. It was a weapon of existential significance. "We're not just fighting a war," Elena told her team during a rare moment of rest. "We're defending the fundamental human capacity for innovation. Every civilization the Zorn has conquered followed their rules. We're going to show them that human potential isn't about following rules. It's about constantly rewriting them." As the first successful prototype of their hybrid technology came online, the research team realized they had done more than create a weapon. They had opened a doorway to an entirely new understanding of technological potential. The Zorn had conquered galaxies through technological supremacy. Humanity was about to show them the true meaning of innovation. The quantum communication network hummed with carefully constructed lies. Dr. Aria Chen, head of the Xenopsychological Warfare Division, understood that true conflict happened long before the first shot was fired. Her team wasn't composed of traditional intelligence operatives, but a diverse group of specialists who saw communication as a multi-dimensional battlefield. Maya Krishnamurthy, a linguistic engineer with neural implants that allowed her to process multiple communication protocols simultaneously, sat at the epicenter of the operation. Her fingers moved across holographic interfaces, weaving narratives that would slowly unravel the Zorn collective's psychological infrastructure. The Zorn's communication network was a marvel of biological engineering, a living, breathing system of information exchange that had subjugated countless civilizations. It relied on perfect information flow, a hierarchical structure so rigid that the slightest disruption could create catastrophic cascading failures. "We're not just intercepting," Maya explained to her team. "We're creating a psychological infection." Their first vector of attack targeted the Zorn's command structure. Carefully crafted communication packets introduced subtle contradictions in strategic reports. Supply requisition logs showed phantom resources. Mission parameters seemed to shift imperceptibly. Command directives began to contradict themselves in ways too subtle to be immediately detected. Lieutenant Diego Ramirez, who had developed breakthrough quantum encryption techniques during the Mars reconstruction wars, focused on the communication infrastructure. They weren't just inserting false information. They were fundamentally altering the way information could be perceived and processed. In one particularly elegant attack, they introduced quantum-entangled communication nodes that would create simultaneous, contradictory information states. A single communication would exist in multiple potential interpretations, creating a form of technological schizophrenia that would slowly erode the Zorn's operational cohesion. The psychological warfare went deeper than simple misinformation. Dr. Chen's team began to understand the Zorn's fundamental cognitive architecture, a collective intelligence that valued absolute certainty above all else. Their greatest strength is their absolute belief in their own superiority. Dr. Chen noted during a strategy briefing, "We're going to transform that into their fatal weakness." They developed what they called conceptual viruses, information packets designed to introduce cognitive dissonance at the most fundamental level of the Zorn's collective consciousness. These weren't simple propaganda pieces, but carefully constructed narratives that would slowly erode the alien civilization's sense of purpose and unity. Reports began to circulate through the Zorn communication networks, impossible stories of human adaptability that defied their understanding of biological limitations, tales of colonies that transformed entire planetary systems into living defensive organisms, accounts of technological breakthroughs that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of physics. The beauty of their approach was its subtlety. They weren't trying to convince the Zorn of any single narrative. They were systematically destroying the Zorn's ability to maintain a coherent narrative about themselves. Major Imani Okik, a specialist in collective intelligence systems, tracked the psychological impact. Their attacks weren't just targeting communication. They were slowly dismantling the Zorn's sense of collective identity. "Watch their communication patterns," she told her team. "We're looking for the moment when uncertainty becomes more dangerous than any weapon." And then the first signs of breakdown began to emerge. Zorn military units started receiving conflicting orders. Communication channels became increasingly fragmented. The perfect synchronization that had made the Zorn so terrifying began to fracture. It wasn't a military victory. It was a victory of imagination. The Zorn had conquered galaxies by treating every civilization as a problem to be solved, a system to be optimized. Humanity was showing them that the most dangerous weapon was the ability to reimagine the very nature of the conflict. As communication networks began to collapse, Dr. Chen allowed herself the briefest moment of a predatory smile. They weren't just fighting a war. They were demonstrating the fundamental human capacity to transform limitation into opportunity. The real battle was just beginning, and humanity had rewritten the rules of engagement. The Epsilon Eridani system hung like a crystalline web of potential energy, each stellar body a node in a complex tactical equation. Captain Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the ISV Prometheus, his command interface a living, breathing extension of his tactical consciousness. This wasn't going to be a conventional battle. It would be a symphony of gravitational manipulation, quantum encrypted communication, and human unpredictability. The Zorn fleet approached in their characteristic formation, a mathematically perfect deployment that had crushed countless civilizations. Biomechanical warships moved with an almost organic precision, their computational networks anticipating every potential defensive strategy. They were about to meet their first truly human opponent. Commander Area Yoshida managed the quantum navigation systems, her neural implants processing stellar mechanics at speeds that would have been impossible a generation ago. The Prometheus wasn't just a ship, it was a living computational matrix that could transform its entire operational paradigm in milliseconds. Initiating Stellar Dynamics Protocol, Yoshida announced, her voice calm despite the massive computational load she was managing. What the Zorn saw as a vulnerable human squadron was actually a carefully constructed trap that would redefine space combat. Each ship in Chen's fleet was more than a traditional spacecraft. They were mobile computational nodes, capable of independent decision-making and instantaneous tactical reconfiguration. The first phase of the attack utilized something the Zorn had never encountered: deliberate computational chaos. Lieutenant Diego Ramirez controlled what appeared to be a support vessel. In reality, it was a sophisticated quantum disruption platform. As the Zorn fleet moved into what they believed was an ideal attack position, Ramirez began to manipulate the local gravitational field in ways that defied traditional understanding of stellar mechanics. Microsingularities began to form, not as weapons, but as computational platforms. Each artificial gravitational node became a processing center that could instantaneously reconfigure the tactical landscape. The Zorn fleet's perfect formation began to warp. Computational systems designed for absolute predictability found themselves processing impossible variables. Ships that had been synchronized with near-perfect precision suddenly found their communication networks fragmenting. Chen's strategy went beyond simple military engagement. He was conducting a live-action demonstration of human cognitive flexibility. "They're looking for patterns," he murmured to his tactical team. "We're going to give them patterns that break their understanding of patterns." The Prometheus and its accompanying vessels began to move in what seemed like a chaotic dance. To the Zorn's computational systems, it looked like a catastrophic breakdown of tactical coordination. In reality, it was a carefully choreographed destruction of the alien strategic assumptions. Gravitational slingshot maneuvers transformed stellar bodies into weapons. A gas giant became a computational platform. An asteroid belt transformed into a network of quantum communication relays. Each celestial body became a potential point of tactical advantage. Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka managed the computational overlay, her neural interfaces creating a multi-dimensional tactical map that would have been incomprehensible to traditional military thinking. She wasn't just tracking ships, she was mapping potential computational states, each with its own probability matrix. The Zorn Reserve Fleet, believing they were delivering a decisive blow, found themselves caught in a tactical nightmare. Ships that attempted to maintain their traditional combat formations discovered that the very fabric of space-time seemed to be working against them. What appeared to be a vulnerable human squadron was actually a mobile computational platform that could reconfigure its entire tactical approach in milliseconds. Each ship was both a weapon and a thinking entity, capable of independent tactical decision-making. In the span of less than 17 minutes, Chen's squadron destroyed over 60% of the Zorn's reserve fleet, not through superior firepower, but through a fundamental reimagining of spatial combat. The remaining Zorn ships retreated, their perfect computational systems overwhelmed by an approach to warfare that didn't just break their rules. It demonstrated that the rules themselves were an illusion. Captain Chen allowed himself the briefest moment of satisfaction. They had done more than win a battle. They had shown the galaxy that human potential wasn't about following established patterns. It was about constantly creating new ones. The real war was just beginning. The transformation began in the most unexpected places. In the refugee processing centers of Mars Prime, Dr. Camille Edenuga watched as entire communities reimagined themselves. These weren't just survivors. They were the architects of humanity's most radical social experiment. Every displaced person became a potential resource, every limitation a challenge to be overcome. The global response transcended traditional military mobilization. It was a fundamental reimagining of human potential. Manufacturing centers that once produced consumer electronics now churned out advanced computational warfare platforms. Agricultural research facilities became centers of biological adaptation studies. Universities transformed their entire research paradigms, with entire departments reallocated to solving specific challenges posed by the Zorn invasion. In the orbital fabrication rings around Jupiter, Dr. Elena Rodriguez's Prometheus protocol team had created something beyond a technological solution. They had developed a social operating system that could transform entire populations into a living, breathing, adaptive network. Sarah Chen, a former education administrator from New Shanghai, found herself leading a global knowledge integration program. She coordinated a network of distributed learning centers that could rapidly disseminate technological knowledge, military strategies, and adaptive thinking techniques across multiple human colonies. "We're not just fighting a war," she told a group of volunteers ranging from teenagers to retired professionals. "We're rewriting the fundamental understanding of human potential." The education system became a weapon. Rapid response learning modules allowed individuals to be retrained for critical roles in weeks instead of years. A marine biologist could become a quantum systems engineer. A retired construction worker could be transformed into a critical infrastructure defender. On the lunar colonies, entire communities restructured themselves. Living spaces became modular defensive platforms. Personal transportation networks transformed into potential military logistics systems. Every piece of infrastructure became multifunctional, every citizen a potential defender. Dr. Imani Okik, a specialist in collective intelligence systems, developed what became known as the Distributed Consciousness Protocol. It wasn't just a communication strategy. It was a way of thinking that allowed human settlements to operate with a level of adaptability that defied traditional understanding of organizational structure. The economic systems underwent a radical transformation. Traditional market economies gave way to a more fluid, adaptive model, where resources could be rapidly reallocated based on emergent needs. Cryptocurrency systems developed during the early solar system colonization now became sophisticated resource allocation platforms that could respond to tactical requirements in real time. In the orbital shipyards of Titan, entire production lines could be reconfigured in hours. A manufacturing center that produced commercial communication satellites in the morning could be producing quantum warfare platforms by afternoon. The most remarkable transformation happened at the human level. People who had never considered themselves warriors began to see themselves as critical components of a species-wide defense mechanism. A network engineer in Buenos Aires could be as crucial to the war effort as a frontline soldier. Veterans from previous conflicts became rapid response training cadres. Their experience wasn't just about combat. It was about adaptive thinking, about turning every limitation into an opportunity. The Zorn had conquered civilizations by exploiting their rigidity. Humanity was showing that its greatest strength was its ability to constantly reinvent itself. Dr. Edenuga watched a group of refugee children in the Mars Prime Processing Center. They were already designing adaptive communication systems, their neural implants allowing them to process complex computational problems that would have challenged entire research teams a generation ago. "We're not just defending ourselves," he told a colleague. "We're evolving in real time." Global communication networks became living, breathing tactical platforms. Social media transformed into sophisticated intelligence gathering systems. Every conversation, every shared piece of information became a potential tactical advantage. The mobilization wasn't just about military preparedness. It was a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be a human civilization. Every person became a potential defender, every skill a potential weapon. As the Zorn continued their invasion, they discovered something terrifying. They weren't fighting a traditional civilization. They were confronting a species that could transform its entire operational paradigm faster than the invaders could comprehend. Humanity had become something more than a collection of individuals. It was a living, breathing, constantly adapting organism. The real war was just beginning. High Coordinator Krelax stared into the quantum communication matrix, watching their civilization's carefully constructed reality disintegrate. The Zorn Collective had never known true uncertainty. Their entire civilization was built on a foundational belief of absolute predictability, a genetic and technological certainty that had allowed them to conquer thousands of star systems over millennia. Now that certainty was fracturing in ways that defied their most advanced computational models. The first signs of breakdown had been subtle. Communication networks began to develop inexplicable latencies. Strategic projections started showing impossible variations. The perfectly synchronized biological neural networks that connected Zorn warforms began to introduce random, unpredictable variables. Dr. Marivaux, the lead xenopsychological analyst for the human resistance, understood something profound about the Zorn's fundamental weakness. Their collective intelligence was simultaneously their greatest strength and their most critical vulnerability. They don't just communicate, she had explained to her team. They exist as a single, perfectly synchronized consciousness, and that's exactly what makes them brittle. The human attacks weren't just technological. They were philosophical, a systematic deconstruction of the Zorn's understanding of intelligence and adaptation. On the communication nodes of the Zorn's primary communication sphere, impossible narratives began to propagate. Reports of human colonies that could transform entire planetary systems into living defensive organisms. Accounts of technological breakthroughs that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of physics. Strategic analyses that introduced cascading layers of doubt into their collective consciousness. Each piece of information was a carefully constructed virus, designed not just to misinform, but to fundamentally challenge the Zorn's understanding of reality. High Coordinator Krelax watched as entire warform battalions began to develop what could only be described as individual consciousness, a concept so alien to the Zorn that their computational systems struggled to process it. Warforms started making tactical decisions that deviated from the central strategic matrix, introducing levels of unpredictability that threatened the entire collective's operational integrity. The bioengineered communication networks that had been the Zorn's greatest technological achievement now became their primary weakness. Each attempt to reassert control introduced more uncertainty, more fragmentation. Lieutenant Ariad Yoshida, managing the human resistance's quantum communication platforms, understood the delicate art of psychological warfare. They weren't just attacking the Zorn's technology, they were systematically dismantling their collective identity. Watch their communication patterns, she told her team. We're looking for the moment when uncertainty becomes more dangerous than any weapon. On the strategic level, human forces began to exploit the Zorn's fundamental limitation. Every time the collective tried to reassert its perfect synchronization, human tactical teams would introduce new layers of complexity that would force their computational systems to recalculate entire strategic matrices. Battles became less about direct military engagement and more about cognitive disruption. A human squadron would appear vulnerable, only to transform the entire tactical landscape in milliseconds. Entire Zorn battle groups would find themselves trapped in computational loops, unable to process the rapid, non-linear thinking of their human opponents. The Zorn had conquered civilizations by treating every challenge as a problem to be solved through perfect computational analysis. Humanity was showing them that true intelligence wasn't about solving problems. It was about constantly redefining what a problem could be. High Coordinator Krelax realized something terrifying. They were no longer fighting a traditional military force. They were confronting a species that could transform its entire operational paradigm faster than the Zorn could comprehend. In the quantum communication networks, something unprecedented began to happen. Zorn warforms started to develop what could only be described as individual personality traits. Some began to question the collective strategies. Others started to show signs of what humans would recognize as curiosity, doubt, even a form of individual agency. The perfect synchronization that had been the Zorn Collective's greatest strength was becoming its fatal weakness. As strategic projections continued to fragment, High Coordinator Krulax understood a fundamental truth. They were witnessing the systematic deconstruction of their entire civilization's operational philosophy. The real war was no longer about territory or resources. It was a war of fundamental understanding. The silence was more profound than any battle. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of Starbase Prometheus, watching the remnants of the Zorn Collective drift through the stellar graveyard that had once been their most secure territories. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a fundamental transformation of galactic power dynamics. Diplomatic envoys from hundreds of previously subjugated civilizations gathered in the conference rings, their representatives looking at humanity with a mixture of terror, respect, and hope. The humans who had once been seen as a marginal species had just rewritten the fundamental understanding of conflict, intelligence, and survival. Ambassador Camille Edenuga addressed the Galactic Conclave, his words carefully measured. "We did not seek this conflict, but we will not apologize for our survival." The aftermath was more complex than simple conquest. Human research teams were already working to preserve what remained of Zorn technological knowledge, not as a trophy, but as a potential resource for understanding. Dr. Rodriguez's team approached the salvage with a scientific curiosity that defied traditional military thinking. "They're not just technological artifacts," she explained to her team. "They're a window into an entirely different mode of collective intelligence." On New Providence, the colony that had been the initial point of contact, a monument was being constructed. Not a celebration of victory, but a testament to adaptation. Each section represented a different aspect of human survival: technological innovation, social resilience, collective problem-solving. Lieutenant Area Yoshida managed the initial diplomatic negotiations. The humans weren't seeking to replace the Zorn Collective. They were offering a fundamentally different approach to galactic coexistence. Preliminary research suggested that some Zorn warforms could be rehabilitated, their individual consciousnesses preserved and potentially integrated into broader ecological systems. The economic implications were staggering. Entire industries that had been built around the Zorn's technological monopoly began to collapse and reform. Communication networks, transportation systems, computational platforms, everything was being reimagined. Captain Marcus Chen, now heading the Galactic Adaptation Research Institute, understood that the real work was just beginning. "We didn't just win a war," he told a gathering of researchers and diplomats. "We've opened a new chapter of galactic potential." Refugee processing centers became something more than temporary shelters. They transformed into hubs of cultural exchange, technological innovation, and collective problem-solving. Survivors from dozens of civilizations found themselves part of a broader human-led initiative that valued individual potential over collective uniformity. The quantum communication networks that had been crucial during the war now became platforms for unprecedented levels of cultural and scientific exchange. A researcher on a distant mining colony could collaborate in real time with teams across multiple star systems, breaking down the traditional barriers of distance and species. Dr. Imani O'Keefe's research into collective intelligence systems began to show promising applications beyond military conflict. The adaptive thinking developed during the war was being applied to ecological restoration, planetary management, and interspecies communication. Not everyone celebrated the humans' victory. Some galactic civilizations viewed the sudden shift in power with deep suspicion. But humanity's approach was different from the Zorns. They weren't seeking to conquer, they were offering collaboration. The final transmission from the last Zorn command node captured the essence of the transformation. It wasn't a message of defeat, but of recognition. A quantum-encrypted signal that seemed to acknowledge something profound about the nature of intelligence and survival. We approached the universe as a problem to be solved. The transmission read. They approach it as a mystery to be understood. On New Providence, a new generation was being born. Children with neural interfaces that allowed them to process information in ways their parents could barely comprehend. They were the first true products of this galactic transformation, beings who saw boundaries as opportunities, differences as potential, uncertainty as a source of innovation. The monument being constructed wasn't just a memorial, it was a promise. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and the universe would never be the same.